questions? I know we have microphones on either side here. You would have to go up to the microphone so we can hear you. There's one right there. You, sir.
Wes Small. It's two things. How do we get the young generation, the 18 to 30, to compete globally against people that have mastered their own language, our technology, and their own technologies and systems? And where do we find them? How do we educate them? Because not everybody can go to college. Because there aren't enough jobs up there, that's what we're living through. Okay, is everybody trying to be a finance guy? Okay.
Well, it's obviously a complicated question with a lot of different facets to it. I think education system obviously is part of it. We talked earlier about higher ed, but K-12 also needs reinvention. There are a bunch of interesting things happening there, but it's not as widespread as it needs to be. The other thing I'd focus even on this region. One of the things I also do is chair this initiative called the Startup America Partnership, which is trying to build up regional entrepreneurial ecosystems all around the country. So we're actually less reliant on a few places like Silicon Valley, and entrepreneurship spread more broadly. Some of that is capital and things like crowdfunding kind of help on that front. But a lot of it is what happens locally with entrepreneurial leaders basically say, we are going to commit that while we're still running our company, or we're still running our venture firms, or whatever we're doing, we're going to commit to work together, kind of in a collaborative way with some degree of passion and urgency to try to make it easier for companies to get started here and educate people, including going to kind of high schools that would talk about entrepreneurship and mentor these young entrepreneurs when they're getting going, and maybe provide more seed capital, angel capital to get some things get started. It's not rocket science that drives it. It requires a concerted, urgent effort, and so part of it is trying to make sure people understand that that's a path that they might want to consider. They get exposed to different opportunities in their community that they are able to capitalize on, as well as getting the skill set, the education they need to be able to be successful in whatever field they choose. So there's a lot to be done at these regional levels, and I just urge people here to, obviously it's part of the reason for a conference like this, but how do you not just come looking for, maybe you're a company, maybe you're looking for capital, can I find investors, which obviously is important. Maybe you're an investor looking to invest, find a company, that's obviously important. But is there something more that could be done to kind of create more momentum, or what sometimes called a network effect or network density, the knitting together these things that are happening in a more concerted, urgent way. It has to happen at a national level, I mentioned. It really also has to happen at a regional level.
I believe we have a question here on the right.
Yes, my question goes to return on capital and risky inventions, where they're based on, in essence, development of intellectual property rights. And, the concern that I see in the market, with, the lack of protection in China and elsewhere for intellectual property, do you see any impact, in the front-end venture investment, on whether or not these investments in disruptive technologies, will actually yield the return that it's supposed to get for the level of risk?
Yeah, I think it's an important issue. It's been actually a focus in Washington. There was a PACT reform that passed about a year ago, the American Defense Act. I think does some steps in the right direction. Still more work to be done, and particularly make sure the younger entrepreneurial startups aren't disadvantaged by larger companies that have kind of legions of lawyers kind of dealing with this. These young companies can be at the bad end of sort of the patent war kind of thing. But the patent office has done some things to essentially create a fast track for young companies. The big challenge when you have a patentable idea is trying to get that sooner rather than later, because a lot of capital investors are going to sit on the sidelines until they kind of have a clearer path in terms of what's there. So it was taking way too long to kind of review these patents. They tried to accelerate. So I think it's a step in the right direction. I think there's more work to be done, frankly, around patents, particularly some of the things around software patents and business method patents. My own sense is, some things that have been getting patented and probably shouldn't be getting patented, and it's actually ends up stifling innovation and economic growth. To figure out what's the right balance to create the incentives for the innovator and the investor to back it, but at the same time not end up having the lawyers associated with the patent system unintentionally end up kind of stifling some of the innovation, job creation, economic growth that's obviously important actually.
Are Apple, Samsung, and Google being overly aggressive in the courts?
Well, they're being aggressive. I'm not sure, given the current rules of the road, I'm not sure I can say they're being overly aggressive. I think they're recognizing that part of the way to win in these technology battles is to basically acquire, either create or acquire large kind of patent positions. And it's sort of like for both offensive and defensive reasons. A little bit like when I was growing up, counting how many missiles they had, and, weapons and deterrence and so forth. There is a deterrent aspect to the patent wars that are happening right now, which basically big companies can play that game that smaller companies can't. So it's like anything. These are complicated issues, and you've got to strike the right balance. I think the American Invents Act was a step in the right direction to try to protect some of this intellectual property. At the same time, we don't want to go too far and end up unintentionally stifling particularly the work of entrepreneurs. Because one of the things I've learned kind of watching, well, growth, frankly, with the merger with Time Warner was sort of exacerbated, but I've seen this in other ways too, is the business world really is divided into two parts. This is overly simplistic, but I'll help think of what. And what I'd say is it's attackers and defenders. Entrepreneurs are attackers. They're disruptors. They're challenging the status quo. They're trying to usher in a new way. At some point, companies get large and become defenders. Fortune 500 companies are, by definition, defenders. And the people running those companies are basically there to manage and hedge risk. They're trying to grow, but they're mostly trying to keep what they've got. It's like in sports, like a protect defense. That's what they're basically implementing. That's important. Fortune 500 companies are a key part of our economy, and so that skill set, managing these large, complicated enterprises, is actually very, very important. We need to make sure we don't lose sight that the attackers are the ones that drive the innovation and economic growth and job creation. So if in doubt, skew your policy towards making it easier for the attackers. Most of the defenders, in fact, all the defenders are the ones who hire legions of lobbyists to try to slow down the attackers and try to kind of stabilize and lock in the firewall the status quo. I understand why they do that. It's like if you're running one of those companies, that's the right thing to do. But let's not make sure we, because we're hearing those voices, which are pretty powerful, we lose sight of the fact that really are these kind of crazy entrepreneurs who believe there's a better way, are willing to kind of put everything on the line to pursue that. They're the ones that create the companies that drive our economy and really drive our country. So they're both important, but let's make sure we as a nation, even at a community level, support and embrace and celebrate these crazy entrepreneurs who are willing to be attackers and challenge the status quo, because as we all know, the failure rate is high. It's a risky thing to do. We need to make sure that that's encouraged and celebrated and not somehow tamped down, or worse, in some communities. I can't speak to Philadelphia. I guess Philadelphia, this region, does pretty well. But there are parts of the country that actually are very risk averse and very unsupportive of entrepreneurs. It's like, oh, that's risky. And if an entrepreneur's first idea fails, in some of these communities, they're failures. They're not failures. Their first idea failed. They all failed a bunch of times before it became an overnight success. It takes like a decade to figure it out. But there's some places that basically, instead of saying, isn't it awesome you took that chance, hopefully you learned something, maybe you can build on that, and maybe the next one will be better, the next one after that. That's how innovation happens. And just recognizing that it is a core value we need to celebrate and encourage is I think really, really important.
Another question for Steve Case. Microphones count.
Hi, my name is Eugene. My question actually goes back to your mentioning of Apple and Samsung. So both extremely innovative companies that are somewhat similar fields, but that exist in extremely different cultures, and yet are at the cutting edge of innovation. So you have Apple that obviously was birthed in the US, where some of our core ideals are risk-taking and failing fast and learning from that, versus South Korea, where the culture is very risk-averse. and sort of shuns failure as sort of a scarlet, letter. And I'm curious how you reconcile that you would have such divergent cultures produce two companies that are really neck and neck in terms of innovation.
Well, I'd say two things. I'm certainly not an expert, but I'd say two things. One would be that 30, 40 years ago, South Korea was pretty hungry. They were like fighting for something. They were really trying to. They needed to build their economy. This is the United States 200 years ago. Remember, the United States was a startup 200 years ago. Here, but it was a start. We were, there's a certain hunger when you basically have to build something, and it's almost like nothing to lose. I think that's a driver. Japan, meanwhile, has gotten to be a little less attacked, a little more defended, and some of the Sony, which 20, 30 years ago was really the dominant consumer electronic company. Well, it's still a great company, but it's lost some of that. And I think that's sort of a dynamic. The second is, and this is changing, and part of the reason to make sure we do win this battle with talent around engineering, and I try to get interventions happening here, is over time, the process innovation that happens as things are iterated, particularly in manufacturing, over time the expertise builds up in other areas, and they really shift from being kind of implementers to being inventors. And I think that's started to happen in some regions around the world. So they wouldn't necessarily have been the ones to come up with the idea of a smartphone or something, but they are pretty good at optimizing and tweaking and improving it, and constantly kind of getting better. As markets develop to a certain point, that skill set of really how do you take it to scale is something that some of these countries, some of these cultures are pretty good at. They're not necessarily as good on the invention side, but there is a fear, which is why I mentioned some of the comments about entrepreneurship in America, making sure that we don't shift into being kind of a more conservative defender kind of nation, and some others kind of become more aggressive and more innovative and driving kind of the next wave of not just companies, but entire industries. Because wherever those industries are birthed and expand, it creates enormous economic growth and opportunity for those nations.
Another question over here?
Hi, my name is Mariella. Along the lines of disruption, Along the lines of disruption, what do you think about the food industry and as it's a case for entrepreneurs?
So food industry?
Yeah. So like the whole food space. I mean, there's a lot.
I think it's awesome.
Open table, perhaps.
Well, or just about, when you think about high growth entrepreneurial companies, the focus is often on, which that's fine, obviously it's my world, technology companies like Facebook and interesting and sort of came out of nowhere, or Apple, which became such a kind of iconic brand. And they are terrific, and they're kind of great examples of American entrepreneurship. But American entrepreneurship is not just about technology, and it's not just about Silicon Valley. It's about many sectors in many regions of the country. And actually some of the greatest entrepreneurial success stories of the past decade have been companies in the food industry and restaurants and other things, other places. Chipotle, based in Denver, is a company now that has a $12 billion market value. That's a lot of burritos. It's a hell of a business. One of the most successful food companies in the last 5 years is Chobani Yogurt. I met the entrepreneur who started that recently. 5 years ago, it was like a broken, closed factory. This year, they'll do $1 billion of sales and have leading market share overnight because they innovated with a more kind of innovative product. In our area, one company, Honest Tea, has done some interesting things in terms of the beverage industry. So there's all kinds of innovation happening in all kinds of different different places, and it's exciting to see. And of course, technology is one of the areas to focus on. But some of these other sectors, including the restaurants, food industry, and so forth, are also very important source of great innovation and great investment returns for people who see that idea can scale not far from here. Another one that people might have 10 years ago said, oh, we kind of lost that industry to other nations is in the athletic wear industry. Under Armour started in Baltimore. Now $5 billion value, I think, and one of now a leading global brands are going to really kind of give Nike a little bit of a run through their money. Kevin Plank basically was a football football player at University of Maryland said, like, when I go to practice, like, my t-shirt's too sweaty. Can't there be like a not so sweaty t-shirt? And came up with one, and sold a few more, and we got a $250,000 loan, 87% backed by the SBA, the Small Business Administration. Now it's like a big success story. This is the story of American entrepreneurship, and it's all over the place, and it creates great opportunities. And I think sometimes we do focus on a few of these great iconic companies in visible sectors, but the story is much broader. Comcast here, I remember the first time I met Ralph Roberts and Brian like 30 years ago. It was a little company wiring together a few neighborhoods, in this region. And now they're obviously a leading global media juggernaut. This is entrepreneurship.
Another question?
Hi.
I'll tell you what.
Sorry. So I'm actually presenting a leading workshop on entrepreneurship this Friday, Saturday to about 750 high school students in Denver. And so the reason anyway, I'll just jump to my question. What would you recommend I share with them to really inspire that spirit of being an entrepreneur?
Well, first of all, I'm glad you're doing it. Second of all, it goes back to the earlier question. I think exposing people to the option of entrepreneurship doesn't necessarily have to start something. They can join something. Not everybody can be the founding entrepreneur. But you can be part of the founding team or part of the team that grows. One company we backed in DC, Living Social, I think 4 years ago, was four guys. We knew them from a previous company. We thought they're going to be interesting guys and an interesting idea. And, now they have like 5,000 employees. And so there were the four that got started, but there are a lot of the people who joined that. So giving people a sense of why this is exciting, why it's important to the nation, and not just about the business. It's something that's a broader story or part of a more important journey, I think, is important. Recognizing you need to celebrate, I wouldn't say celebrate failure, but recognize that failure comes with the territory. One campaign we recently launched, the Case Foundation, called Be Fearless, which is trying to get people willing to take risk across a variety of different sectors, because that's how great innovation comes. And the last one I'd say, again, it goes back to the attacker defender thing, is the path that people thought was, like my dad, just look at different generations. My dad basically had one job at one place his entire life. And the idea of doing something else or some other, kind of switching, in this case, the law firm, those things, is like inconceivable. In my case, when I was graduating from school, the logical path was to go to like a Fortune 500 company. I actually did eventually go to Procter & Gamble, my first job, which was a great company. It was sort of like the obvious safe path, incredible path, crowded path. And there was a lot of reasons to do it. And entrepreneurship then, when I was coming out of school, actually was not really understood, particularly celebrated. Well, guess what? Some of these big Fortune 500 companies aren't the same path anymore. They're victims of some of this disruption, and they're going through their own rounds of change and sometimes layoffs and so forth. So it's not as safe as you think. So it depends on the person. Obviously, you have to be passionate about something and really recognize the ground rules in terms of entrepreneurs are a little bit different. The risks are great, but to the extent people understand that it's not just about their company. It's about the broader entrepreneurial community in their region and the broader entrepreneurial story of America. And each of these entrepreneurs doing their own thing is important, but what they're doing collectively is more important. It's a way to make a contribution. It's a way to serve the nation. I think it's part of the message I would